Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Monday, December 12th. We start tonight's newscast with a look at household debt in Canada. Statistics Canada says the amount Canadian households owe relative to their income rose in the third quarter. The agency says household credit market debt as a proportion of household disposable income increased to 183.3% on a seasonally adjusted basis. Now that's compared to the second quarter's report of 182.6%. So in other words, there was $1.83 of debt for every dollar of disposable income per household. A Liberal MP from Winnipeg and a former cabinet minister has died. Jim Carr was 71 years old. Winnipeg MP Kevin Lamoureux asked the House of Commons for a moment of silence before question period today. The parties then agreed to suspend the House for the rest of the day. Mr. Carr had represented the riding of Winnipeg South Centre for the Liberals since 2015. He had been battling the blood cancer, multiple myeloma, and kidney failure since 2019. All right, moving now to the situation facing children's hospitals across the country. The NDP is calling for an emergency debate in the House of Commons, this to discuss what they call the urgent and escalating situation in Canada's children's hospitals. Leader Jagmeet Singh says Canadian hospitals are dealing with a massive influx of sick kids, and there needs to be real action from the government to improve the situation. Mr. Singh wrote to the Speaker to give notice for the request, citing several alarming developments across the country. He's also calling on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to meet with premiers to find a solution. All right, well, meanwhile, Canada and other G7 countries have launched a new program which is aimed at compelling mining companies to adopt more environmentally sustainable and socially responsible standards. Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson announced the agreement today at the UN Biodiversity Conference, which is happening in Montreal. It comes 3 days after Mr. Wilkinson published Canada's Critical Mineral Strategy, which aims to expand production in a way that is environmentally sustainable. The World Bank predicted in 2020 that demand for critical minerals will rise 500% by 2050. All right, well, on the East Coast, the inaugural First Peoples Policy Forum began today in Newfoundland and Labrador's capital city. The event was organized by St. John's-based Indigenous group First Voice in partnership with the Assembly of First Nations. More than 15 speakers from across the country are set to speak at the forum, which is focused on aligning bylaws and policies with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The event runs until tomorrow evening. All right, turning to a Greater Toronto Area by-election, which is underway today. It is the first contest under the Conservative leadership of Pierre Poilievre. The Mississauga Lakeshore riding is crucial to the Tories' chances of success in future federal elections. Mr. Poilievre has not been very visible during the race, and the Liberals have picked a well-known Ontario politician as their candidate. Hockey Canada has named its slate of 9 nominees to serve a one-year term on its board of directors. Members of the organization will vote this Saturday on whether to accept or reject the entire slate of candidates, which includes 5 women and 4 men. Hockey Canada's board stepped down in October as part of the fallout from its handling of sexual assault allegations, which were against former members of 2 of its World Junior teams. Ontario's tourism industry isn't expecting to fully recover from the pandemic until 2025. Now, this is according to a joint report from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario, which says tourism businesses are generating an average of only 64% of the revenues they saw in 2019. And 7 in 10 have taken on debt to stay afloat. They're also dealing with labor challenges, noting an 81% increase in tourism and hospitality job postings. To the West Coast now, where the Greater Vancouver Food Bank is calling the uptake in foot traffic unprecedented. This comes as it deals with close to 1,000 new clients per month. Now, that is more than twice the usual amount of people seeking food. The increased demand comes amid climbing interest rates and the rising cost of food. Toronto filmmaker Sarah Polley has earned a Golden Globe nomination for Best Screenplay for her film Women Talking. Women Talking was adapted from Manitoba author Miriam Taves's 2018 novel of the same name. The film centers around several women in an isolated religious colony. They struggle to reconcile with their faith after a series of brutal assaults. The Golden Globes is trying to make a comeback after scandals and boycotts. All right, Forum Daily will be right back after a short commercial break with an interesting FDD investigation. Craig Singleton from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies joins us shortly, so stay with us. We'll be right back. A recent report from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies warns of a Chinese tech company that produces genocide-enabling AI and torture tools. And what's interesting is that this company has connections in Canada. In a research memo, Craig Singleton, senior fellow at FDD, warns that Tiandi is producing technology used by the Chinese government to crack down on Uyghur ethnic minorities in its Xinjiang province. The company calls itself one of the top 10 leading CCTV manufacturers in China and a recognized global leader in the surveillance industry. But Mr. Singleton says Tiandi is also involved in producing torture tools. Well, joining us now to tell us more about Tiandi and Canada's connection to all of this is Mr. Craig Singleton himself, senior fellow at the FDD and China Program Deputy Director. Mr. Singleton, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks for having me.
So a very interesting memo you posted recently. Can you tell us a little bit more about Tiandi and how it got under your radar in the first place?
Absolutely. So Tiandi first came to our attention as we were researching the growing and problematic relationship between China and Iran. And we started to see a lot of public statements from Iranian security officials that they were thinking about using Chinese AI to crack down on the current protest movement. And as we dug deeper, we found out that one of those companies was Tiandi.
And from this information, you're saying Tiandi produces genocide-enabling AI and torture tools for China. Some very strong wording there. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Absolutely. All the information that's contained in our memo on Tiandi's operations was hiding in plain sight. It was included on Tiandi's website, in its promotional materials, even on the company's Instagram page. Among other things, we examined the source code that is associated with Tiandi's products to understand how this ethnicity tracker tool worked. The tracker works by determining whether someone is Han Chinese or Uyghur just by scanning their face, whether it's a picture or a live image from a Tiandi camera. We also set about looking at Chinese press releases, and Chinese government sources themselves talk about the deployment of Tiandi's products and services throughout the Xinjiang province being used against Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities. And on the Tiger chairs themselves, Tiandi publishes information about them on their website. They talk about how they sell them to different parts of the Chinese security apparatus, and they talk about how they can be used to detain individuals in very painful positions, often for hours and in some cases days at a time.
And you also highlight in this report that this technology is used by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in Iran and Russia. So that's really interesting. Now, just about 2 minutes left here. So I'm going to jump to another really interesting point in your report. I searched Tiandi's North American page, and it's headquartered in Alberta. So why is this company operating in Canada in particular? What is Canada's connection to Tiandi?
It's a great question for Canadian authorities to investigate, and I think hopefully they will now that this information is known. We have a lot of working theories about why Tiandi chose to set up shop in Canada, but we think one of them has to do with the fact that the company was seeking to avoid detection by U.S. authorities if it had opened an office in the United States. What's clear, though, is that companies like Tiandi shouldn't be allowed to operate at all, and they shouldn't be able to sell their products in the Canadian market, particularly as Ottawa takes a stronger stance against Beijing.
So what sort of steps are you calling for officials in Canada in particular to take regarding these new revelations here?
Absolutely. Like in the United States, Canada has existing authorities to levy sanctions and other punishments against human rights violators. And we think the case for Tiandi is open and shut. Efforts should be made to not only close and sever Tiandi's office that's operating in Alberta, but also to terminate the company's operations, as well as to target the company's ownership themselves, really making sure that they don't have access to visas, to potential residency permits, and really just making sure that this company can't leverage Canada as a springboard to the rest of North America. We think that there is a lot that can be done. What's really missing right now is the political will to do as much, and hopefully that will change now that this information is public.
All right, Mr. Singleton, about a minute left here, but for some perspective, what's at risk here if action is not taken by our Canadian officials regarding Tiandi's operations?
I think one of the most alarming things that we've seen just in the last few weeks as the Chinese government has cracked down on the zero COVID protest movement is the use of technology and surveillance tools to maintain regime stability in autocratic countries. Countries like Iran, like Russia, like China are relying increasingly on artificial intelligence and advanced technologies to maintain public security. What we fear is that these sorts of technologies could become pervasive here in other parts of the world. And that will just make it more and more difficult to eliminate them, to rip them out of our systems. And I think we learned that lesson the hard way as we were sort of working through some of the challenges related to Huawei technologies.
All right, Mr. Singleton, thank you again for your time today.
Thanks.
We'll be right back. As the holiday season draws near, Canadians across the country will be spending more time with family and friends, including our furry friends. But some pets may not have a home this winter. Many new owners are surrendering their so-called pandemic pets to animal shelters. Now, amid this trend, Humane Canada is working to improve animal welfare in the country. The organization helps humane societies and SPCAs across the country advocate for animal protection laws and policies and provide public education and research. Well, to tell us more about Humane Canada and how to give back to our furry friends this holiday season is Ms. Tara Hellawell, Director of Donor Relations and National Engagement at Humane Canada. Ms. Hellawell, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
So what do we know so far about the current trend of acquiring pandemic pets in Canada in particular?
Yeah, we unfortunately, we've connected in with our members, humane societies and SPCAs and rescues across the country. And in the last 6 months, they have reported a big increase in surrenders during this time. Adoptions during the pandemic. So for many, the time it was good to add a family member, and many people working from home and looking for the loving companionship of a dog or a cat.
And now we're seeing reports indicating that a lot of Canadians are giving up these pets or returning pets, as you say. So how is this impacting animal shelters across the country?
Yeah, so our members have seen a spike of animals being surrendered to shelters. And what they're telling us is that they're mostly not the adopted animals that they've been adopting out, but they're being because they have a really good process of trying to make sure those adoptions are a good fit. But instead, the animals are being acquired by other means during the pandemic through breeders of various types. And some of those animals, sadly, they have some serious issues like increased behavior problems, aggression, lack of training, poor health. And of course, there are a lot of factors that could have caused this. But we know that overbreeding of animals in poor health, in poor conditions, like in puppy mills, can be a factor, along with simply not understanding what it takes to train a new puppy, the cost of care for a kitten, for example. And also right now, access to affordable veterinary care is also a big challenge in Canada.
Those are some very important points to consider when adopting a pet or buying a pet. Now, there are a lot of reasons why people might consider returning a pet amid rising inflation and the pandemic recovery. So what kind of advice would you have for pet owners who may no longer be able to afford their pet?
Yeah, we know it's definitely a challenging time for everyone in Canada, including pet owners. And I mean, we have tried to address this certainly. And in 2021, we started a national pet food bank initiative. We granted over $80,000 to pet food banks across the country. And there's more funds on the way, and that program is growing. And so, we ask people, go visit your local Humane Society, SPCA food bank, check and see what supports they can offer. We want to keep pets with families. They want that for sure. And so for those of you who can't afford it, maybe, or if you can afford it, consider pet insurance. Depending on the animal, for a small monthly fee, it can help you cover the high cost of a vet bill in an emergency or an unexpected illness. I know that's not for everyone, but it is a good thing to do to try to negate that risk. Don't feel like you have nowhere to turn. Our member shelters understand and they won't judge. And ultimately, the welfare and safety of the animal comes first.
Indeed. Now, turning to another hand of the situation, what about people who are considering adding a new member to their family amid the holiday season? Can you tell us a little bit more? I know you spoke about puppy mills and breeding. So can you tell us a little bit more about the benefits of adopting a pet, maybe even an older pet this holiday season?
Yeah, there are lots of animals in shelters right now, that's for sure. We know that because we've checked in with our members. So the benefit of adopting an older animal is that they could have better training, they're a little calmer, they may fit better in your home environment, and your local shelter, SPCA Humane Society, can help find a really good fit for you. And if you don't go that route, then please just do your homework. Only choose ethical breeders. Meet the dogs that you're going to be getting an animal from. I mean, there's just a lot of things you can do, and certainly our website has good information about choosing well in that area.
Some important information to consider there. A quick 45 seconds left here, ma'am, but the holidays are quite a busy time. But what do you want Canadians to think about with this holiday season when it comes to animal welfare in this country?
Well, just remember that animals have no voice. We speak for them, and so we need to continue to speak up for them. And supporting an organization like Humane Canada can help do that. We represent animals across the country. We represent humane societies and SPCAs who are caring for them on the front lines in your communities. So, continue to look out for them. They really need us.
All right, Ms. Tara Hellewell from Humane Canada, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today. All right, we'll be right back. After the break, we're going to take a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world, of course, as Ukraine calls for more Western military supplies, and Turkey and Greece continue a war of words about ballistic missiles. We'll have these stories and more coming up next, so stay tuned. Ukraine is calling on the West to provide additional high-tech anti-air missile batteries. The country's prime minister is appealing for Patriot missile batteries and air defense systems to help counter Russian attacks. It comes as Russian shelling is reported in the eastern regions of Ukraine. Moscow is trying to make battlefield gains in the east, this while Ukraine is working to secure resupplies of artillery shells and modern battle tanks. Meanwhile, Greece's foreign minister has lashed out at NATO ally and neighbor Turkey at an EU meeting in Brussels. This comes after Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened to hit Athens with ballistic missiles. Speaking during a youth town hall meeting on Saturday, Mr. Erdogan said Turkey has begun making its own short-range ballistic missiles. He says Greece fears that the missiles could hit Athens. All right, moving to tensions in Iran, which says it has executed its second prisoner who was detained amid nationwide protests, which are now challenging the country's theocracy. Iran's Mizan news agency, under the country's judiciary, says Majidreza Ranavard has been convicted. This was over allegedly stabbing 2 security force members to death last month and wounding 4 others. Activists say around a dozen people so far have received death sentences over their involvement in the demonstrations. Well, it seems to be a different story in Peru, where protesters have scored a small victory. The South American country's new president is giving in to protesters' demands. She announced in a nationally televised address a proposal to move up elections. The announcement from Dina Boluarte came after protests turned deadly. This with thousands of people taking to the streets last night to demand her resignation. Demonstrators are demanding new general elections. They also want the ex-president who was ousted last week and charged with rebellion to be released from custody. All right, moving to the ongoing civil war in Yemen. This is where the United Nations says at least 3,774 children have been killed in the conflict. Now, that's according to the latest statistics published by the United Nations Children's Fund on Monday. A further 7,245 children have been maimed in the conflict. The report found that at least 3,904 boys have been recruited as child soldiers. The agency said that all the figures it has verified in its latest report are likely much higher. More tragedy in Australia, where 2 police officers and a bystander were killed during what officials are calling an ambush. The 3 individuals were ambushed by at least 2 gunmen at a remote property in Queensland state. This came as officers were investigating reports of a missing person. Queensland Police Commissioner Katarina Carroll confirmed the 3 deaths at a news briefing, but she would not provide further details. Meanwhile, amid unrest in China, the country says it will stop tracking some travel. This potentially reduces the likelihood that people will be forced into quarantine for visiting COVID-19 hotspots. It's part of the country's uncertain exit from strict pandemic policies that have helped to fuel widespread protests. The move follows the government's dramatic announcement last week that it was ending many of the strictest measures. All right, turning our attention to an ethics scandal in the EU. Belgian prosecutors investigating influence peddling at the European Parliament have charged 4 people with corruption, participation in a criminal group, and money laundering. Parliament Vice President Eva Kaili was relieved of her duties. Belgian authorities said a Gulf country was suspected of offering cash or gifts to Parliament officials in exchange for political favors. South of our border, U.S. government data shows spills from TC Energy's Keystone pipeline have increased in severity in recent years. This is according to a report last year from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, which said Keystone's safety record when it comes to spills in the last 5 years is worse than the national average. The Calgary-based company currently has more than 250 people on the ground who are cleaning up the approximately 14,000 barrels of oil that leaked into a creek in Kansas last week. A crochet club at an Edmonton high school has donated close to 300 hats to Ronald McDonald House for premature babies. Grade 10 student Brielle Huang started the club at Lillian Osborne High School in September, and she says she was born prematurely as well. She says she also received a hat and thought it would be special to complete the cycle of benevolence. The handmade hats will be part of a welcome bag, and every family with a child in the neonatal intensive care unit will be given one. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary, programming, and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks again for joining us today on Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.